So it's now time for our Centering Social Justice and LIS panel. Damecia Donahue will be moderating today's panel. Damecia is a librarian and the tech bunker overlord with Wayne State Libraries. She also coordinates the library's diversity initiatives, serves on academic senate, is part-time faculty with the School of Information Sciences, and is an alum of our program. Yes, a superhero. Our three panelists are Selena Aguilera, community librarian at Taylor Community Library. She is also a graduate of our program and is the former diversity outreach graduate student assistant. We also have Marcia Black, the Reuther Library's instruction and outreach archivist and Black Bottom Archives contributor. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Meredith Evans with us today. Meredith Evans is the director of the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum, 74th president of the Society of American Archivists, and she too is a graduate and alum of our program. So with that, I give it the microphone to Damecia. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Amber. Do any of our panelists have any other items that they wanted to add to their introductions? I just want to offer you the space to do that if there was something you felt like you wanted to add about yourselves. No? Okay. And also, as we go through these questions, I don't want anyone to feel obligated that they have to answer a question, right? If you don't feel like you want to answer that question, you don't have to. So we wanted to get started today by generally asking, what does centering social justice mean to you, right, in your day-to-day work or, right, your activities in life?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. um, I prioritize the voices of people every day, even though I'm a federal employee and steward a collection from a former president and first lady. I think it's important for us when we're in these spaces, particularly in archival spaces where we are given a collection, to make sure that we're highlighting all that we can that represents women, people of color, and the least of these throughout, because every collection has something.
Yeah, I'll go next. So I think centering social justice day to day, I work in a public library. So I think it just means doing work and study with an extra layer of intention, just keeping in mind that program and services that you're offering are going to be intersectional, and also like recognizing who the most vulnerable person in your community is and making sure you're really trying to bring them in and provide resources and accessibility for them in mind. So yeah, I think it's just like a day-to-day thing, like Meredith said too, just like keeping in mind and making sure we are always paying attention to hearing out the voices and representing them, and making sure that they're also speaking themselves and have a role to play also in the services that are provided for them at the public library.
Yeah, and I think I want to echo what Meredith and Selena shared, that yeah, I think for me it looks like finding opportunities to activate the archival work, to repair harm, to resist, and just finding ways to make sure that the work that I'm doing is working in favor of, the liberation and the health of the different communities that I'm working with. And yeah, I think really being intentional around not continuing the exploitation that a lot of like marginalized communities have experienced when it comes to documenting them and, the narratives that, kind of circulate in terms of how we understand these different communities. So just making sure that, the part that I'm contributing to is, contributing to healing and not continuing harm.
Okay, thank you all so much for sharing. So, in thinking about, right, your careers as LIS professionals, have you seen any shifts in expectations in the recent years, related to social justice? And perhaps do you have any thoughts about maybe what's driving that change?
That's a really great question. I've been an archivist for a really, really long time. And I think we've done this in multiple ways throughout the years. I think it's been more prominent because we have more access to situations in real time. So I've been an activist my whole life, and I've participated in quite a few protests and all kinds of things. But I use my work to make sure that access and discovery of the stories of the people exist in each repository that I work in. So I will say that the difference to me, because the work has always been done, the is that one, more people with the mindset are in the profession, in the library, archival, museum profession, and two, we have a lot of access to technology and everything else that reveals our work and reveals our collections in real time. And I think that's what we're feeling. I think the social justice has always been there because we've always collected and we've always tried to fight for equitable access to our facilities.
And I think from my perspective, I feel like I'm still earlier on in my career. I graduated from my master's program in 2020. And when I was in school, part of what brought me to that program was wanting to document the organizing movement that I was a part of. And I remember like first getting exposed to like the terminology around memory work and community archiving and like finding articles for like my thesis and things. And, now that I'm back associated with the university and I can use these free ProQuest tools and see all these cool research articles, it's been really interesting to see how expansive like the literature and the research has grown as it comes to understanding community archives and the different formations of that. Um, and I think community archiving has been just more popularized in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to like the contributions it can make to, different social justice movements. And I think for me, what's been really exciting to witness is the ways that people have been like interrogating and deconstructing what is an archive and what's not an archive, and, who gets to decide what's worth archiving, who gets to call themselves an archivist. I feel like there's just many more folks that are archivists that, didn't have the pathway of going to a graduate program. But I think because of folks in our field that have maintained their commitments to community, that we've been able to share tools and techniques and also like uplift the like communal cultural ways that we've already have always been preserving our stories and sharing our stories. That, yeah, I think for me on a social justice tip, it's been really beautiful, I think, to witness just like the expansion of how people understand what archiving looks like, and like who gets to call themselves an archivist too. Yeah.
I would say for in public libraries, I think the expectations are definitely changing in terms of, unfortunately, because so many social services, including some of our public libraries themselves and other libraries and institutions, funding is getting taken away. And so a lot of the time, what I'm seeing, I'm a newer professional, so I've been in public libraries as a full-time librarian for almost 4 years now. I have worked in them since 2020 in like part-time capacities, but I've definitely been seeing a lot of different expectations for public librarians to hold when those public services get cut. Like very specifically, in Taylor, our ChristNet homeless shelter was shut down, and immediately, we saw the influx in homeless patrons being in the library, and just having to be sure that we were a resource and a place that they felt comfortable to be in while they were kind of going through that tumultuous time of not being able to rely on the resources that they've grown to rely on. So I think a lot of the time, uh, as a public librarian, you really just have to adapt day to day and make sure that as much of the time, sometimes people come and ask you things that maybe were never in your job description. You really have to flip and make sure you're still providing those services. Also, with just we hear a lot of people being sent our way from like post offices, Secretary of State, because they might not have internet or computers at their home. And so they come to the library thinking we're able to assist them in, for instance, like applying for food assistance and things like that, which is becoming very increasingly difficult. And so you really just have to like have the patience and care and really make sure you want to like take the time to handle it, because a lot of the time sometimes they're coming to you tired, they've been turned away everywhere else, and so this is kind of like the one place that they're really feeling accept, like a, not necessarily like there's I'm sorry, I'm getting my words jingled up, but like they come to us making sure, because they think that we're the place that's going to help them, and like as much as we can help them apply for assistance and things like that, we can't do stuff like type their information out for them. So like also navigating how much help we can give, and that they understand that is something that's definitely evolved. I also think public libraries are doing a great job, at least the Taylor Community Library, on like the forefront of doing sessions on what to do if ICE comes to the library, and handing out, know your rights cards, making sure we have those resources available in all the languages that are popular in our community and things like that. So I think that's kind of how at least my position has been shifting over the recent years, as more of a center for people who maybe have been turned away from a lot of other places.
Okay, thank you all so much for those responses. I think I heard some underlying themes in what all three of you said, and one of those is kind of thinking where we are in this moment in time, right? And sort of what can we do to help the communities that we serve. And I also heard, right, the importance of community and belonging and understanding who the people are that you come in contact with, or the people in your communities or your environments. So I guess that leads me to the question of, what does authentic community collaboration look like in practice for each of you?
From a collection perspective, it's hard. Um, when I say diversified collections, everywhere I've been, I've worked a lot of places, and it's hard because you have to go into a community, build a relationship with a community, and then ask. Um, unlike other races and nationalities where in the academy, it's expected that you give, or if you're a prominent professor, you donate your papers. And at those times, people weren't asking to get paid for their collections either, right? It was a gift to the university to continue the scholarship, or to the public library even. And so now that things have changed each time, I find that in order to get equitable information or to have collections that are diverse, particularly in that, when I was in the academy, you really have to build relationships with the people in the community and get a spokesperson with you. You can't just go in and take it because they're used to that. And so we protect our things because we're used to it being taken. And in this day, we can now build a relationship with the community and share with them the value of not necessarily putting it at an academic, repository, but preserving the history in perpetuity, right? So that whenever that community leader or the mother or father of the community passes away or moves, that the community still finds value in keeping their history and whatever that looks like. And then if they're unable to sustain it, then that's to me when the public library or an academic institution or even a community center come into the picture to say, hey, we really value this. We want it preserved so that 100 years from now or 50 years from now, people remember who you are and what this community was, particularly when you live in a major city like I've always lived in. I've lived in Detroit and New York and now in Atlanta, where gentrification is real. And so when you remove, you know, housing developments and you remove or you push communities out due to taxes or cost or whatever, um, how do you save those and how do you save those things? And so my research in Black churches is part of that because the Black church used to be the place you can find all of that. Your baptism record, it was your birth certificate, the marches and the things that for activism were in the church. That's shifting too. That doesn't mean we don't build relationships with that neighborhood or with a person in that neighborhood to kind of collect these things or find out where it is. And most of the projects that you'll see from in the last 20, 25 years are coming from people who are in the community building relationships, not just taking, right? Requesting and sharing the value of collecting and keeping it in perpetuity.
Can you say the question one more time?
Yeah, so it's just generally, what does authentic community collaboration look like for you on your practice?
Yeah, I think so. For me, a big part is like, not assuming that I'm the expert, and like, seeing myself as a collaborator in the process, not as the leader of anything. Even though I think there's not always a lot of examples of what it looks like to have like non-hierarchical ways of relating, especially when there's like an institution working with a community that, communities also have institutions, formal and informal, but there's a type of power that exists with representing a larger institution. So just, I think resisting like some of that mentality of like, because I went to school, that makes me an expert, because every community is different and like their needs are different, their histories are different. And so like, understanding that in our field that we're lifelong learners, um, there's no one right way to do it. And I think for me, it feels cliche to say, but active listening is like really, really important. I think there's sometimes, people they make their own assessments and observations and they have the answer. And then oftentimes what ends up happening when you take a moment to like slow down and listen is that folks might have tried that before, and there's reasons why that didn't work, or that might not actually be the biggest issue that the community wants to prioritize at this moment. And so, like, um, again, just like humbling ourselves in the process to be led by the needs of the community, allowing them to like set priorities and name what their needs are in order to like show up in a way that, again, is not like replicating the types of exploitations that, we've experienced previously. Um, so yeah, I'd say for me, it always kind of starts with like active listening and also being honest about what we can deliver and what our limitations are. Because I think there are limitations that we have as individuals, whether it be our capacity, our skill sets, but then also as institutions. Like I'm learning a lot about like, one of the things about doing community work, you can come up with an idea and you can execute it sometimes like the next 2 days. There's a person who does it, you have and it's not that same sort of thing in larger institutions. There's designated roles, there's methods of decision making, there are rules, and so being able to be honest and open with folks about what is possible within, the confines of collaborating with the institution. Um, and yeah, listening is so, so important.
Yeah, honestly, Marcia, that was just a really great explanation that I agree with. And also, Meredith, sometimes it is hard. I feel like we always try, or at least as a youth librarian, I'm always trying to like connect with schools and things like that. And sometimes it's like you do need the reciprocation, and sometimes that's not always happening. So you just have to be patient, persistent, and definitely echoing like as cliche it is, as cliche as it is, definitely the active listening, and staying humble, and always making sure that you are more of a collaborator inside these spaces rather than a leader, I think is really important. I think for those anyone in the listening who might be in public libraries, it might be easy to think it might be easy to take for granted that you're already doing community work because a lot of your services are obviously like for the immediate community. But I really encourage you to take a step back and look at the services you are offering and see if there's any gaps and things like that. Unfortunately, sometimes the most vulnerable people in our community are the people who are least aware of the resources that would help them out at the public library. So definitely trying to brainstorm with your community and connect with different partnerships that might be in contact with that portion of your community to make sure that they're aware of these resources that they might not have been aware of before. Stepping inside just like different things as a public librarian, as simple as like a restaurant nearby your work, or just driving around to see what kind of things are around you, looking up what kind of nonprofits might be in your area. A lot of communities already have like separate institutions that they might community members might belong to, like churches or nonprofit groups, or even just community like neighborhood groups and things like that. So really get creative and see what's in your area, especially if you're not familiar with it, to talk to other people in your community that might be able to bring in the people that you might be missing. So yeah, I think that's all I would add.
Okay, thank you. I heard a lot about, right, different ways that power shows up in environments, different barriers that you may face that are out of your control, how you each take care to build trust in those communities, and sort of how you see yourself more as a partner and a collaborator than, right, just this force that's coming in and telling someone how they should be, or how they should live, or what they should be doing. So I guess that brings me to, um, is that a particular mindset, right, that you have to find yourself getting into when you invest in the work? Because I think a lot of the times too, and I guess a second part to that is, how do you rest, right? How do you take care of yourself in doing the work? And how do those two things work together, right? So your mindset is this way, but also in the activist work, how do you rest, right? How do you take care of yourself?
I'd love some ideas. I'm probably not an expert in this
Yeah.
question. I'm trying to figure that out in real time because burnout is real and the need always outweighs what is possible. So I think something to, kind of ground yourself in this work is that nobody is the sole answer, and I think um when I think about my lens of archiving, I think as an organizer, I got exposed to this idea of like the Black radical tradition, which I think has been really impactful for me. And when I'm thinking about the Black radical tradition, kind of understanding this lineage of Black leaders across time that have like done work to move us closer to Black liberation. And so I'm a benefit of the Black radical tradition, and I'm also a contributor. And it just feels like I think this work is best kind of thought of as like a relay race. You're carrying the baton a little bit closer. You're not at the finish line because the finish line keeps moving, but you're carrying it on a little bit closer to like, as a gift to future generations for who's going to pick up the baton next. Um, so yeah, I think for me, like reframing my mindset of kind of understanding, taking some of that pressure of being like, I have to have the answers today. I have to fix this problem today. Um, and then I think the other thing is back to what I said earlier about being honest about what your limitations are. There's plenty of people that I come across who have probably really amazing archives, and they're like, I just need somebody to come to my house and just look through these boxes with me. And just, there's so many people that I come across. And in my heart, I'm like, I wish that I could body double and I could both hold the commitments that I currently have and also be at your house on the weekends. And that just has not been true, you know? And so like it's disappointing to have to say no, but I think something that I've made a part of my commitment is expanding my network of archivists, because there are plenty of folks that would be excited to do that type of work. So for me, I'm like, the best way I can, you know, alleviate that is through continuing to expand my network, especially of archivists that are local that I can tap on to say, I'm not the person, but I know 5 other people that could potentially help you with a project like this. And I'll say, you know, as a person who comes from a community organizing background, like I do have a mindset of like, I want to address all the things. And I've done myself a disservice in doing that, honestly. So really being comfortable with saying no. And maybe it's not a no forever, but no, not right now. I don't have the capacity right now. And just saying that, um, I think creates the space to actually rest. And so, yeah, disconnecting from the internet, would love to do that more. Again, these are things I'm trying to figure out. Like, what does my rest practice look like? What does my commitment look like? Um, but yeah, I think some of the things that I am working on doing to create the space to rest is to be like, again, somebody just said in the chat, like, there's a we outside of me, and like really being able to lean on the we to meet needs that are just outside of my capacity because I am but a human being. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we were all kind of smiling there when that question was asked because it is really hard to separate, especially when it's just the way you kind of lead your life and like, you know, how we all ended up in these professions, I'm sure. But yeah, I feel like I'm still trying to learn. I think it is really important to know your limit. And sometimes, maybe if you're not ready to say, like, no right away, like, maybe you can ask for help. You can rely on your other community partners and, like, grow a network that you can rely on to reach out to for assistance sometimes. And yeah, just kind of, I'm also trying to make sure I'm, like, not always like on the internet all the time, talk like just trying to be outside and talking to your neighbors and things like that, all the little stuff that's like we're all trying to do right now, I think. But yeah, I really feel like Marcia really hit the nail on the head with like, yeah, sometimes you have to admit that it's not the time for you to take on that particular project. That was definitely a learning curve my first year of being a library with the Taylor Community Library, because I was the sole youth librarian there, youth and teen. So it was like so easy to say yes to everything. And then at the end of the day, that just kind of is how you burn yourself out faster. So just kind of be mindful with the projects that you can take on. So then the projects you are working on can be performed with like more intention and focus to make sure that those are being done well too. Because sometimes when you're at that overwhelm, it hurts when something isn't working out the way you want it to because you're not always in focus. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. And I had a boss once that said, you can only get done in a day what you can get done in a day. And I try to just keep that in my head all the time. You can't be upset with yourself. You have to be patient with yourself too. As much patience as you're giving your community, give that to yourself.
Ditto. Now, I would also say, I mean, I plan a lot. That doesn't mean I execute well. And I'm tickled by that whole question, because my son and I have a challenge where we can watch a movie or watch TV without our cell phones, and we have failed miserably. Uh, I think we've done it one time. Um, but I would say I focus a lot on how collections are described and how access is given so that I cannot stress myself out because regardless of what collection I'm working with, because I mean, I'm I've worked for very, the President and Mrs. Carter are very white Southern liberals. So the collection seems like it's just about them, but it's not. And so when you are literally looking at description with people, I always think cataloging and metadata is not as boring. It's actually fantastic because the way we find out the hidden gems are by actually processing and cataloging things well and describing them well so that people know it exists. And then once they know it exists, our job gets a little bit easier. So for health wise, I try to go walking. I'm not sure how successful I am with that every week, but I'm trying. Two, I know that when I'm stressed because I overcommit and then I have to pull back and I'm doing nothing day. So I will literally take off work and I will do nothing. Also very hard to do. I can't help but think about what we're calling marginalized communities and their lack of representation, not necessarily in, a physical or public facility of some sort, but not thinking that their history is important or not thinking that they're not being honest with the history of their family or their lives and wanting people to see something that it's not. I think we should stand in our truths, the good and the bad. And so I spend a lot of time convincing people that you're worthy, that your life is worthy, your good experience and bad experience are equally necessary to tell those stories, whether they're oral histories, whether there's written histories, whether there's just you keep a handful of photographs. I just think it's important because 10 years from now, 100 years from now, people won't know and they'll think everything is always shiny and rosy, and it's not. And so I just want to encourage people to know that your life is valuable, regardless of whether you're embarrassed or ashamed or just happy all the time. Um, we need to document a few things so that we can have a legacy, not for ego, but for the history that's going to get written. We all like social media, but we also know that we have a gap in our society where we know our facts are not facts. But who's going to know that 20 years from now? They're going to think that that's fact, and it's not. And so we do this work to make sure that we have remnants of fact. Um, Intentional. I'm very intentional about the work that I do, regardless of the repository. There's some good things about President Carter, and there's some bad things about former President Carter. There's fantastic things about Mrs. Carter, and then there's not so fantastic things. And so my job is to show that equity, but also show the people's lives that they've touched, and how that defends us in many, many ways. So rest is not, it's in my top 10 things to do. It's definitely should be in my top 5. Fingers crossed it'll get there one day.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I think even if you felt like you didn't have a response to the idea of rest, you all actually did. And right, that's a process of figuring out what that looks like for you as an individual. So I'm thinking about the questions that you shared answers for so far. If you have like, right, your ideal community-centered information institution or your ideal institution where activism is alive and well, I guess what does that look like, right? What would that include? Would that include, are you thinking about resources in terms of human resources, financial resources, any barriers that you see that you're constantly coming up against? What would sort of, right, an ideal picture look like for you? Right, because we can all dream and we can chip away at those dreams and try and bring as much of that into reality as we can. So I guess I'm curious what you all kind of see as, right, what would be ideal for us in the future.
I don't know. For me, ideal would be having digital systems in place that will capture things forever, because we're not at that point. I don't care if you put it on a CD, if you put it on tape, it may or may not be preserved. I've got all kinds of media in my current shop, and you know, you can open the freezer and smell vinegar, and you're like, really? So for me, it's about how do we create systems and opportunities for things to be saved 100 years from now so that we can access it. I love technology like everybody else, but I miss a good piece of paper because I know I can keep that forever because we've seen it. People show me papyrus all the time and things like that. And I'm like thinking, can we have that in digital form? Do we have that yet that's affordable for all of us or free? Right? I have papers in my repository because they were free and they were given. And do we protect people sometimes from things they don't want to see? Sure, we'll hold on to it and open it, 20 years later after you pass or something like that, but we still have it and I know it's still going to exist. I can't say that about my cassette tapes. I can't say that about my born digital content. I just can't, and I want to. And so I don't know the best way to help. I focus a lot on collecting because I feel that that's hard to get equal representation of your community because people are very private, and I respect that. But I also worry about how do we keep the different types of technologies we have accessible to people, or how do we get that data? Do we start transcribing things and describing things that we know may not be visible, 50 years from now? I just don't know. And so that's the kind of thing that keep me up at night a lot. And I want people to be proud of being a librarian and an archivist and a museum person, and be proud of your knowledge and share it repeatedly, because I think word of mouth might be the only way to kind of keep that history of the work that we do and the collections that we work with there.
I think for me, my ideal future of libraries would look like just being fully staffed. And having enough people to like accomplish the work and all the dreams that we want to get done. Having the people to, so you don't always have to necessarily take a step back and you can provide the services that you want to. And maybe even like bringing in some different professionals inside the library space. Like I mentioned earlier, with our services getting cut and stuff, like I think it could be really beneficial to have something like a social worker in libraries, or some mental health resource advocates who are in the building all the time, who can, or like people who can perform the work that as public librarians we're not allowed to, like that typing assistance. Like we're not allowed to put, type patron information in. We're just not allowed to do it. It's I think it's actually like illegal to like type someone's information in for them, but like, so just to have like assistants that are there who like that's their job, and like there's been the legalities run through in their application process to be able to assist patrons in that way. So then we don't necessarily always have to kind of give our hands up and say like, unfortunately this is as much as I can do for you here right now. And I just think that would be cool. I also think in a dream world, every library in your state would be funded like equitably. It is such a bummer to see the difference between libraries even within 30 minutes of each other, and just the amount of information and resources that are accessible because of that funding really changes the game. So I would love if there was some like state or countrywide like thing that could distribute funds when they're really necessary, or like they're always necessary, but you know what I mean, like when a library might need some extra help, like there's something on the table for them. That's a dream world, but in my dreams that's what it would be.
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, I just feel like we're providing an essential service. Um, and I don't feel like we necessarily get engaged with in that way. Um, and even just thinking about, Detroit and, the landscape of what's happening here. The Charles H. Wright Museum is in a financial crisis. The Detroit Historical Museum is in a financial crisis. And yet, it's like if these places didn't exist, there's no place that people could go in Detroit to learn this history for real. So it feels really ridiculous that even institutions at that scale are struggling year to year to maintain. And I don't feel like the standard should be to maintain either. It's like watching all of these developments, for instance, around like AI development, it's like the capital is there. It's just the priority is not aligned necessarily with what community actually needs. Because the idea that there should be social workers at libraries just feels like, duh, and it's not even a matter of like the money isn't there or the people aren't there. It's just a matter of like the priorities of, the country that we live in. So yeah, for me, I think, you know, if we tax billionaires, we could use that money, and then we could use those tax dollars, and then we don't need to apply for grants all the time because we're fully funded by our public dollars, right? That would be great. It's like foundation, what's that? I would love for us to just like forget if we tax billionaires, we could deconstruct foundations. We would not need that. That wouldn't be necessary. So yeah, I that would be my dream. My dream is like, let's tax the rich folks so that we can tap into the public dollars that we should be able to have access to anyway. And I think that would just like relieve like the tiredness, the like stretchness, because so many of us are not just thinking about the execution, we're also in charge of thinking about the strategy and the funding. And like that takes so much energy. And I can even feel that now there's a heaviness to this work, I think, because of like the threats around what funding looks like for all the different types of work that we're doing right now, that could be just like gone. So yeah, that's my dream. That's my dream.
Thank you so much. Those are all amazing comments about, right, the future that we would all like to see. And I think a lot of those things are possible if we, stick together as a community and kind of work through these things. And I don't know how many people got their taxes done, but many of us owed this year, and many of the people who make a ton of money and are causing a lot of harm did not get taxed, right? So when we think about the work that we're doing and the energy that we're putting into it and sort of the communities that we're trying to help and sort of what happens to all of us, it can be difficult waters to navigate. So I guess I wanted to ask each of you, right, what made you want to get into the profession, right? So we've had a lot of issues with representation across LIS for centuries. It's getting a lot better. So I guess what sort of drove each of you to pursue the careers that you have?
So the people, our history, honestly. I was a history major, thought I was going to be a professor. I'm an HBCU grad twice over, and I actually went to the earliest HBCU's library school. So we were surrounded by activism from the time we started library school to the time we left. It never changed. But that school's now closed, right? For technology reasons, whatever that means. So for me, what got me into the profession was history is fun and it's interesting, but people were using materials from archives to write that history. And some of people were making it up. And so my goal was always to try to diversify collection so that you couldn't say that that didn't exist. So I just wrote and made it up, or I asked two people, and that's how I got that data. Um, because I want people to write truthfully with the necessary information, especially when it comes to women and people of color. They assume that if stuff doesn't exist, then it does. So we may have chosen to collect and hide it from you, or may have not have kept it at all for our safety. And those are things that people don't recognize. And so for me, I got into this to make sure that that the collections that I steward represent the marginalized communities or the people that have been overlooked for centuries, so that you know that they actually did the work and it did exist. And some of those people that you thought did something couldn't have done it without us.
I became a youth librarian specifically, I think, because I was definitely a library kid. I grew up in the library all the time. My mom had me in there whenever she could. By the time I was able to just go in there on my own, both of my parents were working all the time. And so that was the space I could go into and feel safe and hang out and just be there until they were ready to pick me up. And it really was a safe space for me. Like, librarians changed my life. I went when I was in high school, I really didn't see, going to school really in my immediate future. And my high school librarian, who I still talk to this day, which is super cool, he said, no, like, you're going to apply to go to college. Like, I'm going to make you apply, and we're going to do this together. And he also helped me get into different writing programs, different art programs. I graduated from Western International Detroit Public School that collaborates with an organization called Inside Out. The writing and poetry programs in there literally opened my eyes and made me realize I could do this too. For so long, I was reading books about people who never looked like me, never shared my experience, and was trying to identify with this. And, you can still identify with different narratives and different perspectives. And then I was doing the poetry thing, and one of the ladies who was leading the workshop was also Latina, and she was a writer at U of M, and it really just, my librarian changed the trajectory of my life, and I just wanted to, if I ever am that person for somebody, like, that would be amazing. And every day I will keep trying to be that for somebody, for some kid. So yeah, that's why I love libraries. I love doing what I do, and I really like working and engaging with youth and teens specifically for that reason. So
That's so beautiful. So for me, I'd say I didn't have much engagement with archives up until I was in college. So I went to Mary Grove College, and there was an Institute of Detroit Studies there. And I had a capstone project to, do a research paper on like a piece of Black history, or a piece of Detroit history. And at that time, I was a new organizer, and I was getting exposed to a lot of different like political ideas. And I learned about Black feminism at the same time that I learned about communism. And so I was like, what were Black women communists doing in Detroit? And I remember like trying to find research and really struggling. I'm also an undergraduate student. So, I'm like still navigating. And so I had to basically table that idea, and I instead focused on Irma Henderson, which is Detroit's first Black woman on city council and the first Black woman city council president, led anti-redlining legislation here statewide, just really like a powerhouse. And she was somebody that didn't explicitly identify as a feminist, but embodied those principles in a lot of different ways. So I still kind of got to learn about the thing I was interested in. But that was my first time ever going to an archive, was going to Burton and looking at her collection. And, I think one, I kind of fell in love with the process of like touching these old papers, seeing her handwriting, seeing her like learning about her connection to Wayne State. She's also an alum of Wayne State. And just like, I just was in love with that whole process. And I do also come from a family of educators. So I similarly was like, leaving undergrad, like, am I going to be a professor? Because that's like the first thing that comes to mind is like, I like learning. I should teach. But then I had another experience through AmeriCorps where I got placed at the Arab American National Museum. And I worked with them on my first oral history project that was called Digital Detroit Stories. So it was all about migration, immigration, and displacement. And that really expanded my understanding of what archival work looks like. I hadn't previously done any sort of oral history work. And so that was another aspect that I kind of fell in love with and wanted to figure out how I could apply that in the communities that I'm a part of. Because when I was working at the museum, like that was taking me all over the city. I was getting to see parts of Southwest I hadn't seen before. I was in Dearborn. I was talking to folks who are part of like Caribbean cultural associations. I was everywhere. And then I was like, okay, how can I, apply this in the communities I'm a part of? So both of those experiences and my family being in my ear, like, you need to go back to school. I saw UT Austin, saw they had a dual degree in women's and gender studies and information science. And so it felt like a really great opportunity to like deepen my study in Black feminism and then also figure out like these new tools and skills that I could bring back home with me. So yeah, that's like my story. And because Irma Henderson has been so key, if you know me, you know I always talk about Irma Henderson because I'm not sure that I would have like gotten as interested in archiving had that not been my first introduction was looking through her papers. So it feels really yeah, I love archiving now. Now I'm like trying to convince everybody to do it. And you don't have to go to school to do it. That's my favorite part is like going to school and learning full circle that, oh, actually, you don't have to go into thousands of student loan debt dollars in order to do this type of work. And so being able to be a person that shares that information and like lessens one of the barriers for people being able to feel confident about doing that work has been, really beautiful.
Okay, thank you so much to each and every one of you for existing and doing the work that you do. And thank you, Amber, and the Inclusive Excellence Committee and the school here for allowing me the opportunity to moderate this amazing panel. I will hand it back over to you, Amber.
Thank you all so much for that wonderful and thought-provoking discussion. There was a lot of conversation happening in the chat with some of the things you brought up. I just wonderful. And I want to say too again, before we get to our closing keynote, thank you to everyone who has participated so far today, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. I want to give a quick shout out to, I know he won't like it, but we're doing it anyway. I want to give a quick shout out to Mike Dukevich, our CIS Academic Services Officer. He's been the one doing all the tech behind this. So he's been our quiet but steady soldier, making sure that everything runs smoothly. So I wanted to make sure we thanked him as well. But with that, thank you to our panel participants again for a truly impactful conversation.